But yeah, guys, I thought we might as well learn. There's another plane crash today? Where? Where? Vancouver, right? Yeah, we just went live. We just started. Toronto. Is that thing upside down? That plane is upside down. Nobody died. Fuck yeah. Nobody died, chat. Nobody died. 15 people were injured. 3 of them are in critical condition, including a child. Now, yes, that's terrible, but it's also fantastic that nobody died. Thank God. Wish you could be the visual actor for video games. Your expression from TikTok is why I followed you. Thanks, brother. Who knows, maybe I'll end up acting again in the future. I've been acting my whole life, but right now, this country is on a downward slope into fascism, and I'm gonna do everything that I possibly can to help prevent it. So again, to remind you, if you voted for Donald Trump, fuck you and suck my dick. Does that clarify? 80 passengers, 15 of which injured. That's not that bad. I mean, of course, it's bad, but... Yeah, excuse me, sir, you can't park a plane there. Luigi, be nice to him. Anyway, I got some good videos for you guys here. We're going to learn about the Nazi dismantling of the Constitution. Because people often, or constitutional law, people don't even know this, or they forget that the Germans had constitutional law. And from the time that Hitler took over power, it only took him 53 days to dismantle democracy. And as we know, the Führer, Elon Musk, and his beta bitch gimp, Donald Trump, are trying to dismantle democracy piece by piece. So I figured it would be best if, in the 53 days that it took Hitler to demolish democracy, we'd watch a 53-minute long video. I don't got shit to do today, so... Well, actually, I do gotta go to the gym at some point. Oh, that's Beans. He's a coward. Michigan here, ready to do what I can do. How you doing, Michigan? I like to call you guys Winterfell. You know, I say we should build a wall, but we should build the wall on the northern border to block out the Canadians, right? And then we take all the Michiganders and we build a castle, and you guys become the Night's Watch. How does that sound? How does that sound to you, Michigan? I feel like that's pretty fair. That's where you guys would be happiest. Your game? Good. Oh, anyway, let's get to watching. We're gonna learn a little bit about this. I'm gonna give my opinion every couple of minutes just so that we don't get cut down for fair use, but I think this is critical, guys. If you're interested in watching this in yourself, this is from Timeline World History Documentaries, The Nazi Dismantling of Constitutional Law in Germany. Let's get to it, yeah? You guys down for the funk?
This channel is part of the History Hit Network.
In post-World War I Germany, the law had been a most respected entity, with the country regaining some stability, in part due to capable lawyers and judges, many of them Jewish. In 1933, no law could inhibit Germany's political and military rise to power. In a step-by-step process, the National Socialist government dismantled constitutional law, usurped justice,
Yeah, we're gonna have that, but fucking MAGA hats.
and created a lethal totalitarian system that soon engulfed Germany and all of Europe. Redefining the nation as a pure political and biological organism, the Nazi government imposed legislation that reinforced its ideological program in all aspects of German life, with a focus on race, business, religion, and medicine.
Race, business, religion, and medicine. Now, let's just try to relate that. Race, business, religion, and medicine. Well, today in the United States, we have massive focus on race, especially when it comes to civilian status, right? Citizen status. Migration, huge, huge conversation to talk about. What were the other two?
With a focus on race, business, religion, and
business. Well, we've got that when it comes to the new American oligarchy.
medicine.
Religion, obviously, that's a huge thing. And medicine, we've got that with HHS and the new RFK Jr. saying the vaccines don't work. Should go live on YouTube. I would do that, but I'm pretty sure I am suspended from live streaming on TikTok. Let me see. Yeah, I can't go live on TikTok until February 24th.
Bulletin. Adolf Hitler is dead. He is dead, and how he died, the world little cares. For Hitler's death, millions have prayed, and millions are now thankful for justice. 1920, Hitler began. He was considered just a joke then, a raving crackpot.
Just like Trump. Trump was considered just a joke when he ran. So was Hitler. People forget. When you are an outsider to politics, people laugh at you until they can't laugh anymore. Okay? And just how Trump was ostracized by his own community, don't forget, he was a wannabe billionaire his whole life. He was raised by his father, who was not super rich, but rich. Trump was around all these people his whole life. He was born in Queens. He's going to Phantom of the Opera all the time, spending time in rich boy clubs. You know, he's always wanted to be a member of the elite, but they wouldn't accept him. So instead, he forced his way through.
At the dawn of the National Socialist Party in Munich in 1923, a little-known Austrian political upstart by the name of Adolf Hitler naively attempted to overthrow the Weimar government of President Friedrich Ebert. Historically, the Bavarian beer hall served as a locale of camaraderie and occasional ideological meetings.
The beer hall putsch took place in November of 1923. The Weimar Republic, which started out in 1920, was in crisis. Certainly the Weimar Republic had all kinds of obstacles to try to overcome. Its leaders were seen as responsible for Germany's surrender in World War I, which no one in Germany expected.
Yeah, so that's called the Dolchstoß myth. I've talked about that before. A lot of people don't know this, but one of the biggest reasons why the Germans were able, or the Nazis were able to get power in Germany, was because of this myth that was spread right after the war, World War I, which is called the Dolchstoß myth, which translates to the dagger in the back, or the backstab myth. And these, a lot of it was perpetuated by German veterans of the First World War who spread this lie that, hey, we didn't lose that war, we could have won that war. We're Germany, we got the might. In fact, we were stabbed in the back. We were betrayed by our generals and the bankers and the Jews and the politicians, right? And they gave the people somebody else to blame other than the elite, who historically, throughout all time, the rich people at the top just bend over the poor people and fuck them up the ass. And that's what you saw in World War I when you got things like the Willie-Nicky correspondence. I want to pull this up for you guys. Have you guys ever heard of the Willie-Nicky correspondence? You guys ever heard of that? I just seen a TikTok hit piece on you. Bro, dude, they've been trying to take me down on TikTok for years. You can't take down the king. You cannot take down the king. All right, so the Willie-Nicky correspondence. So It's important to know that during World War I, while everybody's fucking dying, I mean, between 20 and 60 million people die. Well, the leaders of these nations were first cousins, okay? Here's Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, and here's Tsar Nicholas of Russia, two mortal enemies during World War I. They were also first cousins. I want you to think of your first cousin. They were first cousins. They had the same grandmother, Queen Victoria. Also, the same thing goes for King George of England at the time. All of them were cousins, okay? So these two are first cousins. They grew up together playing chess against one another, and now they're sending tens of millions of their own men to go fight and die against each other. What we end up seeing is 75 different letters after the war between Willie and Nicky that were sent during the war. And it is quite literally like shit talking in like a Call of Duty lobby. So let's just see one of them. This is from Tsar Nicholas of Russia to Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany. I foresee that very soon I shall be overwhelmed by the pressure forced upon me and be forced to take extreme measures which will lead to war. To try and avoid such a calamity as a European war, I beg you, in the name of our old friendship, to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far. Nicky. So, the tune of their messages changed because it's like 20 years of messages, but this is what you see in history, is while the rich eat their caviar and clink their champagne glasses and debate with each other over who is right, we fight and die. We get sent to go clean up the mess while they just sit in their ivory towers getting fat and happy.
They were also seen as responsible for the Versailles Treaty, which all Germans felt was incredibly unfair, even though both the surrender and the need to sign that treaty were really dictated by the generals, who felt that Germany could not sustain further military action.
On November 8th, with 600 stormtroopers led by Ernst Röhm, Hitler descended upon the Bürgerbräukeller and shouted out, "The national revolution has broken out. The hall is surrounded." After several speeches by putsch leaders, Hitler left, wrongly believing the revolution had begun.
If you love history, then you'll love History Hit.
No, we're not doing your ad, bro. You don't get to fucking do an ad. Only I get to do ads.
By what Benito Mussolini had done in Italy, where he had been able to organize a march on Rome, which put him in a position of power, felt that he could do the same thing. Now, in his case, he had to start from Munich in Bavaria, which is where the Nazi Party had begun and built itself up. And his plan was twofold.
Fun fact, my family is from Bavaria. I've got a lot of German family members who have lived in Bavaria for a very long time. I had a couple of family members who were part of this Nazi organization, and you don't see me trying to excuse away their crimes the way that Elon Musk has given speeches at the fucking AFD telling him, don't be ashamed of what your grandparents did. Motherfucker, I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted. You know what that's called? That's called growth. That's called learning.
He was going to coerce the leaders of Munich and Bavaria into moving out of his way, and he was then going to march on Berlin.
Hi, Bubba.
At 11 a.m. on November 9th, Hitler and his followers attempted to take over Munich public buildings. But the armed police and army, alerted to the Nazi Party's actions, fired upon the marchers. This left 16 Nazi martyrs whose blood soaked the swastika banner of the newly formed Nazi Party.
In 1923, there was a great deal of economic turmoil in Germany, and Hitler decided to seize the occasion to try to dismantle the democratic process in Germany. And essentially establish a dictatorship.
So that's exactly what you're seeing in the United States right now, and this is why I try to tell you guys this. When it comes to living in a heightened state of desperation, it becomes very easy to turn people into weapons, right? And in Germany, people were living in an incredibly heightened state of desperation because of the hyperinflation that was caused by the economic recession, the Great Depression, right? And when we got inflation, the Germans got hyperinflation. All of these Germans wanted somebody to blame. So Hitler gave them somebody to blame other than themselves. And the thing is, they shouldn't have even been blaming themselves in the first place. What they should have been doing is blaming the Weimar Republic, blaming the leaders at the top, not blaming their fellow German. And this is what you're seeing in the United States right now, is Americans are the richest men in our nation. Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and Peter Thiel, the wealthiest men in human history, got together and told the stupidest people in our nation that the reason you're poor is because of immigrants and trans people. And these dumb fucks believed them. All while the fat cats at the top had their fucking hands in the pockets of MAGA voters, stealing their welfare checks, stealing their Social Security checks, stealing their disability checks. It's unbelievable.
Interesting part of the beer hall putsch is that the putsch itself was so poorly disorganized that he never left the city limits, so that he ended up being tried in a local court. Had he made it outside of the city limits, or even on his way to Berlin, he could have been tried for treason in the national court and in fact have faced a death sentence.
Wouldn't that have been nice?
Prison, where Hitler wrote his credo of hate during his imprisonment in 1924, following the unsuccessful beer hall putsch. This was a hallowed shrine to official Nazis, but to American GIs, it's just a jail that Hitler never should have left.
Although Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison, he was imprisoned less than 9 months, during which time he continued to build his party network and dictate his blueprint for the Nazi Party program. Mein Kampf provided the seminal ideas for the party's attack on Jews and communists, based upon political and racial laws.
Once Hitler realized that he wasn't going to be able to take power by force, he decided he had to use the political processes to attain power.
Just like Trump. Trump tried to take power by force in 2020 with a violent insurrection, the attempted overthrow of our government with the fraudulent elector scheme, and when he realized that that wouldn't work, he decided that he would try and win democratically. And once he had the power democratically, he would destroy the very democracy that put him in power in the first place. Now, the same way that Adolf Hitler was just a puppet and his masters were, Himmler and Goebbels and Göring, Trump is just a puppet, and his masters are Elon Musk and Curtis Yarvin and Peter Thiel and the billionaires that he's always sucked up to.
And he manages to build the most successful political party in Weimar Germany and become the most successful leader. And it's amazing, because up until the elections of 1930, it doesn't look like he's getting anywhere. He had this idea, build it and they will come, that if he created the infrastructure for a wide-scale political movement, the opportunity would come along. He recruits, he develops propaganda techniques, he learns to use technology, he recruits a successful group of lieutenants. And when the Great Depression strikes, and once again the Weimar Republic is vulnerable...
Chris, I was informed that somebody reported you to the FBI and Secret Service for something you said on live streams. Is this true? Oh yeah, dude. People report me all the time. The same people that don't give a fuck about Elon Musk dismantling the democracy in front of them will literally report you to the FBI for talking shit about their new Führer, Mango Mussolini.
It is Hitler and the Nazis that are in this position to capitalize on that and move to power. But he had always said that he was going to use the Constitution to destroy the Constitution. And he was going to use the rules of the Republic to destroy the Republic. Certainly, the Reichstag fire, which occurs in February of 1933, helps him.
Apparently Maddie's in the chat. Say something, Maddie. Say hello.
The German House of Parliament
Say
in Berlin,
hello.
which has been seriously destroyed by fire.
The Reichstagsfire was essentially the 9/11 of Germany.
So the Reichstag fire, this is what I've talked about. It's a false flag event. I've said it a million times. I do predict that there will be a false flag event during this Trump presidency. Butter MP5, that cannot be Maddie. But yeah, so what the Nazis did was they burnt down the Reichstag and then blamed it on the socialists and the communists. That way they could rally their base against them right off the rip and say, look, we win the election, and immediately they take it down.
Adolf Hitler had been chancellor of the country for less than a month. There were crucial national elections a week away. And suddenly, this very symbol of German democratic process goes up in flames in an arson attack. The Nazis exploited this event to great effect. The Hitler government immediately blames the communists for this, and the next day Hitler approaches the president and he says, we need to suspend civil liberties. Hindenburg was hesitant, but ultimately signed, and that essentially was the first major step in the dismantling of the democratic system. In the atmosphere that existed at that point, a lot of Germans were willing to sacrifice certain liberties for the sake of national security. And once again, I think, given what the United States went through after 9/11, I think one can understand that. And I'm not saying that the dynamics or even the situation was the same, but it can, if one wants to try to imagine what it was like in Germany at that point.
I mean, I know that he's using 9/11 as an example, but how old is this video? How old is this? 2 years ago. Okay, so even that's a little strange to be using 9/11 as an example. You see that today. Conservatives are willing to sacrifice their own rights if it means solidifying security, national security. Republicans are more than willing to get rid of their right to a judicial process simply because, like the Lake and Riley Act, which was just passed, that says that if you are accused of committing a crime as an undocumented immigrant, you could be arrested. Not if you are convicted of a crime, but simply accused of committing a crime. Now, this is the Conservative Party actively advocating to strip themselves of their own rights because they live in a perpetual state of fear. Okay? Can't see video? We're not playing the video.
Germany changed with the seizure of power in January 1933 dramatically, but not immediately. It was actually an extended process that the Germans called the Gleichschaltungsprozess.
By labeling the Reichstag fire as a terrorist attack by the communists, Hitler convinced President Paul von Hindenburg to suspend all civil liberties.
Hindenburg did not like Hitler. He could not even stand to be in the same room with the man, but the political constellations of things were such that he appointed Hitler as chancellor.
Yeah.
Hitler
so Hindenburg
then,
is like Trump, the actual president. Elon is like Hitler, the one who has the real power. And the chancellor, the president understands that he can't talk badly about the chancellor, otherwise his people will turn against him. That's what you're seeing right now in the modern Conservative Party. People are afraid to shit-talk Elon because they understand that Elon is the one who actually has power.
Other Nazis set about systematically dismantling the various pieces of democratic process. Some of it through legal means, some of it just subverting the system and ignoring certain laws.
The first major step in overthrowing the justice system occurred with the suspension of all civil liberties and the installation of protective custody, or Schutzhaft.
A protection against communist acts of violence endangering the state, restrictions to be imposed on personal freedom. Well, that's coming next.
What happens in the enabling law is by this time, the Communist Party, as a result of the Reichstag fire, had been declared illegal. And that eliminates a powerful bloc of anti-Nazis from the Reichstag. At this point, Hitler goes to the Reichstag and asks for a 4-year dictatorial regime, which would suspend most civil liberties and virtually create a state of almost permanent emergency powers.
Der uns in den 14 Bildern gemachten Zusicherungen begann für Deutschland.
At the Kroll Opera House in March of 1933, Hitler proposed the law for removing the distress of Volk and Reich. To keep the folk secure, the communist ideological enemies were rounded up and imprisoned.
So now what we're headed into right now, this is the future for America. Well, the first 11 minutes, we've gone through that already. What now you are seeing is the future for America. Okay, and in the upcoming months, you're going to start seeing dissidents who are stand against the Fuhrer, Donald Trump, being targeted. I'm probably just the first example of this. You already see that people call the FBI and Secret Service on me. They try to report me to the feds because they're bootlickers. There's Maddie. Hi, Maddie. Everybody say hi to the Queen. Hello, Queen. But yeah, no, so this is what you're going to start seeing in the future. People like me, people like Jolly Good Ginger, Good Trouble, anybody who has the audacity to talk badly about the Fuhrer, they will then be labeled as an enemy of the state. So if I ever stop posting, you know what happened.
Wird eingesetzt, alles Handeln bestimmen. Das Volk lebt nicht für die Wirtschaft und die Wirtschaft existiert nicht für das Kapital, sondern das Kapital dient der Wirtschaft und die Wirtschaft dem Volk.
One of the pro-communist anti-Nazi lawyers caught in the web was Hans Litting, who had defended communists against the wrath of violent Nazis, even daring to question Hitler on the stand for 3 hours in a 1931 trial. Hitler never forgot what he viewed as humiliation at the hands of Litting, and eventually deemed the prominent attorney an enemy of the state. Sent to a concentration camp.
Everybody call Maddie pretty real quick. Everybody tell Maddie she's pretty.
Honorable, half-Jewish attorney paid for his integrity. After 5 years of Nazi torture in a concentration camp, Litting committed suicide. In March 1933, in an effort to confine the enemies of the state, an old munitions plant on the outskirts of Munich became the first Nazi concentration camp.
The outskirts of Munich, we get the first Nazi concentration camp, and the first American concentration camp is set up on the outskirts of Cuba at Guantanamo Bay. Now, if you don't know this, we've already sent, I don't even know how many migrants have we sent. Flights to begin. I open up this at work and got Nazis on my screen. Yeah, Ed, we're learning about Nazis, brother. Also known as MAGA voters. Yeah, so we've already got this. The first flight of illegal aliens shows up at Guantanamo Bay, February 5th. So this is from like 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. Anyway.
After targeting the communists, Hitler turned his attention toward his next enemy, the Jews. From that time on, virulent anti-Semitism dominated the philosophy of the fast-growing party throughout the 12-year Reich.
Now this, again, I'm from the future. This you will see when it comes to Latino-owned businesses. In the future, the Nazis, the MAGA rats, will start to target and boycott all Latino-owned businesses. You will see that. It'll be the modern version of Kristallnacht. Right-wingers in Germany now say the Nazis were leftists. That's not just in Germany, bro. You see that across the planet. And that is what Hitler and the Nazis wanted. There's a reason why they call themselves the National Socialists. They were fascists that hid behind the guise of socialism. That way, all of their evil actions could be blamed on socialism. And this is what I try to tell people is, for example, North Korea is called the Democratic Republic of North Korea. The DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Does that make them a democracy? No. China calls themselves the Communist Chinese Party. Meanwhile, they're the #1 most hyper-capitalist nation on the planet, and they export more goods than any other nation on Earth. They also have a 1%, and they've never destroyed their class system. They haven't reallocated wealth. They haven't built any communes. They haven't democratized the workforce. So, does that make the Chinese communist? No. Simply because you put the name of a political organization in your title does not mean that you practice their beliefs. You need to take people by what they do, not by what they say. For example, I believe in leftist policies. If I ran as a conservative and won and then enacted leftist policies, would that make me a conservative? No. That would mean I hid under the guise of conservatism. See, commissioners later want to commission a mid-length video to help me explain things the way that you can. I'm trying to break through my idiot parents one last time. It's not a bad idea. I mean, I haven't, but you just tell me what you want me to talk about, and I'll try to do it.
Hitler's 25-point National Socialist Party stressed the importance of segregating Jews from Aryan society and soon led to abrogating all of their legal, civil, and political rights.
Okay. Thank you. And they fucking made these people wear that. Also, notice, like, I just made a video. Let me see if I can pull this up. I just want you to see something, all right? Just so you can understand what we are up against. Let me see if I can go to my TikTok. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you aren't actually standing up against Nazis. You are literally standing against Nazis. Here's your proof. I posted this. See this? Look at the caption. Nothing about MAGA. Nothing about Trump. Nothing about Republicans. And now, I want you to read the comments. So, I know you dipshit. Why is it going?
So while
because I clicked that button, I see. Look at the reaction from MAGA right. That one's funny. I'll give him that one. These people. Oh, you guys don't see it. My bad. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Look at this. This is the post I made. No mention of Trump, MAGA, Elon, Republicans, and now just get a look at the, let me take me off the screen. Or actually, we'll just keep it there. And this is why I made this comment up top. Okay? Notice how mad they're getting. Notice what they're mad at. Notice who they stand with. Notice how they claim not to be what they defend. Make a video or make a post that just shits on literally Hitler himself, and these people get angry. Or, sorry, these people. Unbelievable. Actually made another one like that too. Where is it? This one. Don't have to mention them at all. All you have to do is mention that you don't like fascism, and they will scream, cry, shit, and then roll in their own shit like the swine they are. So, never forget that you are not standing against Donald Trump voters. You are standing against Nazis. You are standing against fascism. Simon says, bro, why are they complaining even? Listen, I know this is going to be concerning to you because, Simon, I know you're German. They are complaining because they are Nazis. They want fascism. They want it. I've asked them on live, said, yes or no, do you guys want a dictator? Hundreds of yeses come flowing in. That's what they want.
On April 7, 1933, Parliament established its first major law to curtail the rights of Jewish citizens, the law for the restoration of the professional civil service. According to the Aryan paragraph, Jews were legally excluded from civil service positions. On the same day, a law was imposed that prevented Jews from admission to the bar. This legal assault had devastating consequences for Jewish lawyers. For the most part, Aryan attorneys were pleased, and few voiced any negative reaction to such violence.
17, about to beg my parents to buy guns. This sucks. I can't stop laughing. Yeah. I grew up in a house that didn't have guns. As soon as my fucking dad died, I bought a gun. Listen, if your parents are naive enough to understand that their ideological enemies are armed to the teeth and that your parents think they will be safe without a single weapon, can't help you, brother. Turn 18, go get your own. You don't need permission no more.
Violations of justice.
The history of Jewish lawyers in
This
Nazi
bird lady
Germany
says, do they realize they'll be screwed too? No, they don't. These people think that if they enact a modern version of fascism, they will be the new rulers. Don't forget, these are the same people who actually think that all of the money Elon Musk is draining out of the government, they're going to like write checks and send them to all Trump voters. Okay? These are the same people who when Trump, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. They fucking believed him. These are the same people who thought there were Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes in Colorado. Okay? These are the same people who think that hundreds of thousands of Americans are being killed by the cartel every year. There's nothing you can do to fix these people. They're so unironically dumb as shit. Fortunately, my parents voted for Trump. A lot more guns than I do. Well, I mean, gun's a gun.
Really follows an arc from the unification of Germany in the 18th.
I need good info in Spanish for my wife since she doesn't believe. No hablo español muy bueno. Pero su novia es un idiota. Es un pollo por KFC. Dude, any fucking Latino that advocates for Trump is literally like a chicken advocating for KFC. You're out of your fucking mind, dude.
1970s through the Nazi era. With the unification of Germany, Jewish lawyers for the first time were allowed to enter into the legal profession. And they flowed into the legal profession, and they became very prominent in the legal profession. When the Nazis came into power in the winter of...
Cuando los montañas están azules, la cerveza está fría. Coors, prueba los Rockies.
I'm gonna let this play while I grab another cup of coffee.
1933, they immediately tried to reverse the emancipation of Jews and the liberal legal order which had allowed Jews to become part of it and in which Jews had played such an important role. The Nazis round up its opponents. It arrested within several days 4,000 of its political opponents. Among them were Jewish lawyers. But at that point, the Nazis were arresting its political opponents, not Jews as Jews, not Jewish lawyers as Jewish lawyers. But within several weeks, it became clear that the Nazis were going to target Jewish lawyers as well. There were attacks on courthouses organized by SA thugs who would enter into the courthouses, who would throw out Jewish lawyers, would throw out Jewish judges. Violence served a purpose for the Nazis. They used it to its full extent. They used it quickly, and they scared people. But the Nazis also realized that violence had its limits and that they could also use law in order to promote their agenda.
Hitler claimed that Nuremberg was the most German of cities, with a tradition that aligned itself
Sorry, guys. It's, early in the morning. I'm getting, like, fucking emails, texts. I'm getting so much shit. The live technology struggle is so real. I know, it's such a fucking pain in the ass. My comment should be on that post on TikTok under the one saying you fell off. Dude, there's so many comments, you got no idea. Excuse me. Woo. No one saw it, Stephen. Hope you join the right side of history soon. Violet, I am curious. What do you think is the right side of history? I'm curious. What is the right side of history? If you like collabing with someone to make some of your videos in Spanish, yeah, I'm not against that. I'm not opposed to that. It's not a bad idea. Oh, yes, the right side of history, the Roman Empire, of course.
with the nationalism of the 1930s. Known from medieval times as a city that burned Jews at the stake, Nuremberg continued to fuel animosity during the Third Reich. The city hosted the party rallies and also served as the venue for the promulgation of the Nuremberg Laws. Hitler used the 1935 National Socialist Party Congress in Nuremberg to launch these infamous race laws. For Hitler, blood purity ensured the vitality of the 1,000-year Aryan Reich as
blood purity is also a huge thing for Elon Musk. Don't forget, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel were raised in apartheid South Africa. They were taught not simply by their parents, but also by their teachers, that them, Elon Musk, the Afrikaner, were superior by blood right to all the black people living around them. Elon Musk is a descendant of a colonizer, okay, somebody who came all the way from a different nation to South Africa for the sole purpose of enslaving the people there. And now, the 7% white population that owns 70% of the farms are finally being targeted by the majority. And they're running for their fucking lives. To the point where the Fuhrer, Elon Musk, has gotten Donald Trump to sign an executive order welcoming white South Africans into the United States. No blacks. Literally, this executive order is welcoming South Africans of European descendants, of European ancestry, into the United States. Donald Trump, notoriously the most anti-immigrant politician in American history, just signed an executive order to welcome immigrants into the nation, as long as they're white. Now, who do you know that is a white South African that cares about that? Because I only know one. And I do not find it coincidental.
Find in the Nuremberg Laws of September 15th, 1935.
Erde die Menschen nährt und aus der Fruchtbarkeit seiner Familien die Nation Ort erhält.
I'll say this. There's a couple of things that you can't deny as a historian. Number one, Hitler gives a good speech. And I've said this a million times. What the Democrat Party needs today is a politician that has leftist, populist ideas and uses Hitlerian verbiage. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, the way this man delivers his speeches, it didn't matter what he said. He was capable of getting people to listen to him because of how he said it.
As defined in the Nuremberg Laws.
And that is what you need. Remember when Trump said, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it? What we need is a billionaire, no, sorry, not a billionaire, a leftist to go up there and say, we're going to build free health care and the billionaires are going to fucking pay for it. Somebody needs to go up there and curse and have balls of steel and tell these billionaires to suck their dick on live television.
September 15th, 1935.
Erde die Menschen nährt und aus der Fruchtbarkeit seiner Familien die Nation Ort erhält.
Hitler used the 1935 National Socialist Party Congress in Nuremberg to launch these infamous race laws.
Yeah, the one-drop rule.
In this way, the government revoked Reich citizenship for Jews and prohibited Jews from marrying or having sexual relations with individuals of German or related blood.
These Nuremberg laws, they were the ones that really prescribed citizenship for Jews. Citizenship was something that would be granted, like a license.
This is also something that you are going to see happen in America over the next couple of months, is that citizenship, the idea of citizenship will be changed entirely, okay? You will have to be loyal to the party in order to maintain your citizenship, and being a citizen will come with more freedoms, okay? Now, I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in the United States. I do fully expect that as I keep on insulting the Fuhrer, by 2028, I will most likely have my citizen status revoked. Same thing with anybody else who has the audacity to disrespect the Fuhrer. Does that sound insane? Yes. But you know what else sounds insane? Is usurping Senate, Congress, and the House of Representatives and just ignoring court orders from the Department of Justice. That's what Elon Musk is doing while he's illegally hacking into the U.S. Treasury and planting a 19-year-old into the Energy Department, where he now has access to all of our nuclear secrets. Everything I just said already happened. All of our nuclear secrets have been illegally downloaded onto a private server operated by Doge and is now being examined by a 19-year-old who was fired from his previous job for leaking private information to a competitor. That's the people that MAGA voted into power. Of Granted, MAGA wasn't aware that they were voting in Elon Musk and Doge, but we were. I was aware. I tried to warn you. I tried to warn them. I'm not alone.
Citizens had rights of citizenship. The second law was about keeping the purity of race. And it begins by prohibiting any kind of marriage between an Aryan and a Jew. It spells it out. If there is already a marriage, it's invalid.
So I just want you to look at this artwork, because what you see here, what this is what I like to call the sandwich method, which is you take two real things, and two real pieces of bread, real things, and then you put in a whole bunch of bullshit in between. And the representation here is, you know, the rich billionaire, corrupting the German family. But the subliminal message, the shit inside of it, look at the nose, right? They're clearly, it's not about the fact that this guy is wealthy or corrupt. This is about the fact that this guy is Jewish, and they mask it behind corruption and wealth, saying that all Jewish people are this. Meanwhile, it was in their fucking face that there were Jewish people who were not billionaires. There were Jewish people who weren't super fucking wealthy, who weren't in control, who were just normal, average peasants like the rest of the Germans. But that ends up being swept under the rug when you shine a light and just say all of your problems are to blame on these people.
An Aryan and a Jew. It spells it out. If there is already a marriage, it's invalid. There were prescriptions, no kind of sexual relations. That was going to take a little bit of policing. And there was a provision that no non-German, Jewish or other, female servant could be kept in the house of Aryans under 45. That was going to go into effect a little bit later. The bulk of the law went right into effect the next day.
Ist der Versuch der gesetzlichen Regelung eines Problems, das im Falle des abermaligen Scheiterns dann durch Gesetz zur endgültigen Lösung der Nationalsozialistischen Partei übertragen werden müsste. Hinter allen drei Gesetzen steht die Partei und mit ihr und hinter ihr die deutsche Nation.
But with these laws, there was so much exclusion. Jews were really being excluded from public life. They had no rights.
It didn't matter whether you were a religious Jew or not.
Jesus
to Hitler.
Christ.
If you had a quarter to an eighth of your background Jewish, you were Jewish. So it wasn't a religious thing. It was a racial, ethnic. And so if you had a Jew...
This is something I've talked about too, that in the eyes of a Nazi, you will always be Jewish. There's no converting from Judaism. In the eyes of a Nazi, Judaism is not a religion, it is a blood, right? And this is why you see how they treat Judaism not as a religion, but as an ancestry, where it's like, hey, your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a Jew, therefore you have Jewish blood. That is the most insane, and this is something that you can tell easily. If you ever want to tell if the person you're talking to is a Nazi, you just have to ask them, be like, hey, if I was raised Jewish and my parents were Jewish, but then I converted to Christianity, am I still Jewish in your eyes? In the eyes of an anti-Semite or a Nazi, there's no escaping it. It's in your blood, right? Now, in the eyes of somebody who's... And also, just so you understand, that's not just in the eyes of the Nazis. That's also in the eyes of the Israelis, who are a version of the modern Nazis, right? They do everything that they do in the name of Judaism, right? And by doing so, every evil and heinous act that the Israeli government commits is blamed upon Judaism, right? And this is why you see that across the nation, we have across the planet, we have a major anti-Semitism problem. Big part of that is because Israel keeps on shooting Jews in the foot when they say, hey, we're going to do this in the name of Judaism, and then they go and commit a fucking genocide. And then everybody across the planet who already hated Jews has a excuse where they can hide it under the guise of anti-Zionism, which is a totally valid movement. I'm anti-Zionist, yet there are anti-Semites who will hide behind that veil in order to push their ideology. There are counter-coup militias forming all around the U.S. I know at least 8 still growing. If the law foes, politicians break, we are the line of defense. Mike, send me a DM on Instagram about that.
Even if you converted, you were still Jewish according to the racial laws, based on your background, based on your lineage. And so it was a eugenic and genetic and hereditary. And it was all caught up in social Darwinism, but it was a genetic, and that was a different kind of anti-Semitism.
Through legal machinations, the Jewish community was also forced out of the medical profession and denied civil rights.
This all bit them in the ass, by the way, because the Germans believed in this thing called Jewish science, which is, what a hilarious thing to say. Science is science. Just, that's period. Science is science. And they believed that any science that came up by a Jewish person was just useless. And this is part of the reason why the Germans collapsed. They didn't have the scientists to speed up their nuclear program. While the Germans were fighting tooth and nail to try and use fucking heavy water in a Norwegian facility to create an atom bomb. You know who we had? Einstein, who fled Nazi Germany. We had your guy come over here and help us build our nuke quicker than yours. This is what, when you start to advocate for like isolationist policies and segregation, this is what happens. You end up devolving. Your people end up regressing, not progressing, because the whole idea of multiculturalism and accepting different cultures is increasing innovation. The more brain, it's more people to think, it's more people to plan it, you know? The Nazis are either Aryan or you're not. Yes, exactly. Germany, I can't express my true opinion on Israel, not Judaism, Israel. It's crazy. Yeah, well, I mean, you have a similar thing here. Like, I can express what I want about, being anti-Israel, but I'm going to lose 90% of my sponsors. Like, Israel has bought out most of the American advertising business, right? So it's very difficult for you to criticize Israel and still make money.
Particularly, starting out in 1933, it was made extraordinarily difficult, almost impossible, for Jews to practice either profession of law or the profession of medicine. They were essentially outlawed from those two professions, and they were a major portion of those professions at the time. So, some people argue that this was an economic move, that the doctor.
If our military was ordered to fight alongside Russia against NATO, would they do it or would they revolt? They would do it. They would do it. You have to remember, most of the military are brainless, uneducated morons who simply follow orders. Are there some members of the military who are willing to disobey a direct order? Yes, but they also have to be smart enough to know that that direct order is antithetical to the oath that they took. The majority of the people who join the military are uneducated. That is why they join the military, to get free education. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but no, the military will not stand with the people.
Doctors and lawyers were happy to
or
get
at least the majority of them will not.
Rid of the Jewish doctors and lawyers, and that was part of it. But that's one reason it was supported so much that no one really.
Gotta go. I don't stay where people crap on our service members. Love you, Valenti. Peace out.
Came out against it, but it was really a move to get rid of the Jews. It was a disgrace that the other doctors and lawyers didn't stand up for the Jewish doctors and lawyers, but I think that can be two reasons for that. One was they actually were fine with the Nazi propaganda and racial hygiene and really believed the Jews were infecting the national body of Germany.
First stream,
but
welcome.
Economics
Kigaku.
was not irrelevant. It made those professions much scarce.
Why don't you train? You've read your words. No, I do train. I actually have training at 2 o'clock today. Soldiers get hungry too. That's why Nicholas is sending them the hard way, so Trump better feed his guys. That's true.
Therefore, they could charge more money. Therefore, they were more revered. So they had self-interest in that as well.
Yeah, so also that's another sign is that you will see MAGA rats advocate to remove their ideological enemies from business simply because it'll help their business. If you don't have to compete with, liberals and immigrants, then yeah, you're going to be able to charge exuberant amounts of money. And that's exactly what you're going to start seeing.
In the Nazi blueprint for a healthy society, those with disabilities had no place.
I hate this fucking part. I hate this part. This is the most abhorrent shit I ever heard. This is the most abhorrent shit I ever did here.
A Berlin memorial today commemorates some 200,000 deemed not worthy of life by Hitler's manipulation of the law.
This was legal. This was not the Holocaust. This was legal. Quick question. You're the fellow who openly said that people should put... Oh, jeez. I don't know what you're talking about, but if somebody did that, I would be thrilled.
So the Nazis proposed racial laws beginning in 1933. That law was called the Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Offspring. Now, I think even the language, the wording of that law is important. You're not preventing diseases, you're preventing diseased offspring. And what that law
openly call for the death of people. No people. Fascists. Fascists are not people.
Recommended, based on the science of the day, was that people who were considered not to be contributing to the genetic health of the body of the Reich could be forcibly sterilized. And in fact, that law actually said 50,000 Germans a year ought to be sterilized, even if it was against their will, for the good of the Reich.
So that Israelis today are similar to modern Nazis, and it's coincidental how this comparison is explicitly written as anti-Semitism in the IHRA's working definition of most countries use. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's because AIPAC has purchased the United States.
Those racial laws were important because they codified what authors Hoke and Binding had suggested in 1920 in a book in which they coined this phrase, life unworthy of life.
It began with the sterilization programs of Germans, of the retarded and the mentally ill. And so the sterilization program,
What's ironic
1933,
is that the reason why they stood against the sterilization program and the euthanasia program wasn't because they were killing people. It was because the Catholic Church said, hey, these are still Germans, by the way. They had no problem with the killing. They had the problem with the fact that they were Germans. They were like, if you want to be doing this, you should be targeting people who aren't German. That was the problem from the Catholic Church, which is, I think, fucking hilariously ironic.
The sterilization law, which allowed compulsory sterilization for the feeble-minded, which was a catch-all for anybody you wanted to sterilize. But the sterilization program moved into the child euthanasia program. And the child euthanasia program moved into the adult euthanasia program. Doctors involved in all of this. There were genetic sterilization courts where two
what's
physicians
crazy
and
is
a
there are
lawyer-
people like the older millennial who have advocated for this. The older millennial once said, and I think it's clipped out, that he wants all mentally deficient people to be thrown off of a mountain. That's what that guy has said before. He literally on video posted it himself. Said that he advocates for mentally disabled people to be thrown off of a mountain in order for the betterment of our blood. That's what people like the older millennial have said.
Sat on the sterilization court. One physician had to be an expert on eugenics or hereditary, and so they decided almost universally to allow sterilization. But after that, moved on to the euthanasia program, which is a misnomer, by the way. It was the murder.
Murder.
It wasn't euthanasia. These were not terminally ill people. It was just murder.
And please remember, like I said earlier, this euthanasia program was completely legal, democratically voted in.
The strategy of Hitler's political regime was to undermine, dismantle, and decimate all ties to traditional religion. The government attempted to have the Volk aspire to a single national Reich Church under Archbishop Ludwig Müller.
Lieber Herr Reichsbischof,
Does this remind you of anything?
im Namen unseres Führers Adolf Hitler und im Namen der ganzen deutschen Jugend
Bishop Clemens von Galen risked his life by giving an anti-euthanasia sermon in Münster on August 3rd, 1941.
They hated Catholics? Yeah, dude, you have no idea how many fucking uneducated Americans think that the Nazis were, like, Catholic. Think that they were targeting Jews because they were Catholic. No, the Nazis hated Catholicism. The Nazis hated Christianity. Reason being, if you believed in a god, that meant that there was somebody higher than the Führer. They wanted Hitler to be your god. The only religion they wanted you to believe in was Nazism. The only god they wanted you to praise was Hitler. And that is exactly what you're seeing with the right wing today in the United States. You've got Paula White, the head of the Department of Faith, saying that to say no to Trump would be like saying no to God. That is a direct quote from the head of the Department of Faith, which is replacing our Department of Education, because they don't want you educated. They want you indoctrinated into Christian theocracy. They want you to believe in everything that they spoon feed you. Never forget that the same people who are like, hey, my 9th grader is too young to be learning about sex, they are willing to send a 4-year-old to a church that tells them if they lie, they will burn in eternal hellfire. So don't forget, the same people who accuse you of indoctrinating their children with sex ed are actively indoctrinating their children with the fear of eternal hellfire.
Due to his strong protest, the euthanasia policy was scaled back.
Are you going to address your Gestapo visit? Yeah, so the Gestapo has not visited me yet, but when they do, trust, I will be making so much content out of that. I'm going to turn that whole thing to my advantage. Also, I highly doubt the Gestapo is going to come visit me, considering I am one of probably 10,000 or more people who want the exact same thing. They probably have other things to deal with.
In 1937, the relationship between the church and state in Germany had reached a point where there was great tension, specifically on the freedom of Catholic organizations, the arrest of Catholic clergy, and the situation of Catholic schools and religious education being taught in schools, and the future question of Catholic youth groups and ministry to youth.
Elon, the new Christian, got a new son outside of marriage. Dude, Elon Musk has 13 children, and allegedly, his shit don't even work. They're all IVF babies. Allegedly.
That the German bishops were so concerned that they petitioned the Holy Father, the Pope, to do something about that, to try to protest. The result, with input from the German bishops, was an encyclical, Mit brennender Sorge, with burning desire, with burning concern, stating that the German Catholic Church was under persecution and that the Reich government was in no way following what it promised to do in the Reich-Vatican Concordat agreement. That statement was actually read on Palm Sunday from the various pulpits throughout Germany. The Gestapo tried to confiscate any of the printed copies throughout. They allowed them to be printed, but then they confiscated them throughout the Reich.
but the information and the...
I said earlier, but have we made the comparison between Keir Starmer and Chamberlain and Farage and Mosley? No, we haven't, but yeah, no, Nigel Farage is a lot like Oswald Mosley. That's a good comparison video. I'll probably make that video tonight. Thank you.
Protest was lodged, and it was heard very clear.
The Reich passed the law for the restoration of the professional civil service. And while this did not require the churches to employ only non-Jewish pastors, many in the churches, certainly not all, but many sought to implement that policy in the church. There were antagonistic policies on the part of the Reich towards the churches. So in 1937, the confessing church seminaries, which had been operating for a few years, were closed down. They were declared illegal, so they had to go underground to talk about the Bible, to train people for ministry and these sorts of things. Then in 1939, all of the confessional schools, both Protestant and Catholic, were closed throughout Germany. So there was a very antagonistic approach on the parts of the regime. So when we talk about the persecution of the Christian churches, and in particular the Protestant church, I think it's important to emphasize that the churches were rather aggressively pursued by the Nazis in the early years from 1933 to 1937. There were plenty of laws that were passed against them.
In the Third Reich, Jehovah's Witnesses faced a unique choice with regard to their faith.
Oh yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses held the fucking line against the Nazis. I don't know why people don't know this, but the Jehovah's Witnesses pretty much just refused to bend the knee. And as Christians folded one by one, different sects of Christianity folded one by one, the Jehovah's Witnesses just dug their fucking heels in the ground and said, we are not bending the knee.
How they have grown, we have seen how
because they are weird.
Them as they made the truth their own.
Well, they behaved them like other traitors. For example, if women weren't prepared to work in the factories to construct weapons, they were sentenced to death. And that had been the same with men who weren't prepared to go to the army. They didn't have a particularly feeling against the belief system of Jehovah's Witnesses. They didn't know the system. They only had the notion that Jehovah's Witnesses didn't adore the system. They weren't prepared, for example, to do the Hitler greeting, to celebrate Hitler's birthday. It was
to celebrate Hitler's birthday. Let's talk about that for a second. Adolf Hitler made his birthday a national holiday, and if you didn't celebrate his birthday, you were publicly ostracized and put on a list as a dissident. Donald Trump and the Republican Congress have now proposed a bill to make Donald Trump's birthday a national holiday. And if you don't think that you will be monitored on that day to see who celebrates and who hates, I hate to inform you on how naive you are. But yes, I hope you prepare to start celebrating Donald Trump's birthday, because that will be a national holiday soon. I just found you. I'm educating myself over all of this. Why does the USA support Israel so much? Israel is the largest United States military base on the planet. It is smack dab in the center of the United States' favorite sandbox to play in, also known as the Middle East, where it is riddled with brown people who we, as American government, do not deem human. So the Middle East is a perfect place for us to try out our new weapons before we have an actual enemy to use them on. This is why we employ Israel to test our weapons on the brown people near them. That is why. Joe Biden famously said, if Israel didn't exist, we would have created it. And that's true.
In National Socialist Germany, and that was sufficient. That was it. And there was surprised how strong these small group of believers resisted them.
In the Third Reich, Jehovah's Witnesses faced a unique choice with regard to their faith.
witnesses were offered to sign a paper to end their relationship with the organization, with the Watchtower Society, and then they could be free. But they didn't do that, and that's the difference to the situation of the Jews. The situation of the Jews, even if the assimilated Jews who didn't even know that their fathers and grandfathers had been Jews, hadn't any chance to flee the system because of their blood.
See?
The Jews were
just
the
like
most...
we're talking about, because of blood. They don't consider this to be a religion. They consider it to be an ethnicity. This is why I'm so anti-Zionist. This is why I'm so anti-Israel, is because when you start labeling a religion as an ethnicity, an ethno-religion, you are digging a hole, a very dangerous hole, okay? And that hole is that you can no longer remove yourself from that religion based off of choice. When you start to say that you are an ethnically Jewish person, what that does is it opens up anti-Semites to say, oh, so Judaism is in your blood, when it is not. The belief that you have in your Lord and Savior is entirely based upon faith. It has nothing to do with your blood.
Persecuted for both religious and racial reasons. From October 1939, they were relocated into large urban ghettos in Warsaw, Łódź, Lublin, and Krakow.
Norwegians.
To control these communities with a false sense of law and order, the Nazis established the
Now, I know that
Judenrat,
these are black and
a
white.
Jewish council within each ghetto.
I know that these are
To
black
control
and
these
white still
communities with a
photos.
false sense of law.
But this was somebody's life. I wish I could colorize this and add in audio so you could understand and see this like it was a TikTok live stream. This was not a movie. These are not actors. This was people's real life, okay? And if you don't think that humans are still capable of this, you're an idiot.
Law and order. The Nazis established the Judenrat, a Jewish council within each ghetto. These forced liaisons between council members and Nazi overseers still remain a sensitive subject today.
Once you are in the ghetto, you basically in the camp to die. All the laws, Germans start with the legal things. They come to the country and they say Jews cannot have a property, Jews cannot have radios, Jews cannot have fur. I mean, all the occupation laws function before the ghetto. Once you are in the ghetto, it's just waiting for death. There's no more law in the ghetto. There are law, but there are Jewish law by Jewish Judenrat. Jews were already deprived of the basic things, and then creating of the Jewish district, of the ghetto, was the final German occupation law, which was based, of course, on a big lie, on a hypocrisy, that actually now, where Jews were already second-class citizens, and to protect them from anti-Semitism, from the conflict with the Christian population, apparently it will be better for them if the part of the city will be designated for them, so they can have their own governance. So my father, who was an engineer in woodworking, construction, was working for the needs of the Jewish Council of Judenrat.
That is the most controversial question about the Shoah. It's about the Jews collaborating. Some say of their own will, some say that they've been forced to, but they were collaborating.
I think that's bullshit because, yes, of course, there were Jewish people within the ghetto who were, quote-unquote, collaborating with the Nazis, but they had no choice. When they were all thrown into the ghettos, at least these leaders of the Jewish communities were doing something to try and preserve their community. Obviously they didn't think that they were going to be thrown into fucking death camps. To assume that's going to happen to you would be unhinged at the time. And it's the same reason why I am being accused of being unhinged. It's because I see the patterns of history and I'm trying to prevent them from coming. But these people were not collaborating with who they thought was their killers. They were collaborating with who they thought were their new leaders.
With the Nazis. Now, the big question is, which kind of collaboration was it? If it was voluntarily, then of course it's a terrible thing. But since we know that the totalitarian regime of the Nazis made people to do things that they would never do in otherwise. And in the concept of what Katsetnik, he was one of the inmates in Auschwitz, and then he became to be a writer and a witness in Eichmann trial, he called it another planet. So in this other planet that have its own rules, have its own language even, people acted differently because they were under a force, under a threat, and they had to manage somehow their own communities. They had to survive. That was always like that. That's how they survived.
The only controversy was a kind of ethical one, whether a Jewish person should help Germans to...
You are, quote-unquote, trying to prevent them from coming, but all you're doing is making videos. Brother, the time for education is over. Action is the only way forward. Oh, okay, so you just think that the time for education is over, which is unironically the stupidest fucking shit I've ever heard, and you are quite literally helping them. That is what they want. Why do you think the majority of Trump voters are uneducated? It's because they want the uneducated. The more uneducated rats there are in this nation, the easier it is for people to fall for fascism. You've fallen for their propaganda. I understand the time for action is now, but how do you expect there to be any sort of successful action if half the population is too fucking stupid to understand what's happening around them? What I am doing is trying to convince the young 18-year-old white men who voted for Donald Trump because they thought he was going to lower the price of eggs. I'm trying to convince them that the man they voted for is different than the man who ran for president. There's campaign Trump, and then there's President Trump. Two different fucking people. And the only way to get these people on board is to shine a fucking light in their face. Hold up a mirror and say, did you vote for Elon Musk? Did you vote for Luke Ferrator? Did you vote for Curtis Yarvin? No, you voted for Donald Trump. That's the point. They aren't going to listen to you. They are. And I have converted so many MAGA rats straight back to reality, and I'm not going to stop now.
Keep order. They were keeping order with the Jews under Germans' orders, obviously. Of course, the other solution would be not to have any community organization. It was absolutely a necessity.
On December 7th, 1941, Himmler reinforced Hitler's directive Nacht und Nebel, night and fog, a policy that summarily bypassed the law by relying upon special German courts to sentence suspects in occupied territories to concentration camps. Under the cover of darkness, they simply disappeared. In time of war, treason was punishable by death. As chief judge of the People's Court, Roland Freisler, the hanging judge, frequently chose to enforce the death penalty for many of those who stood before him pleading for justice. Between 1943 and 1945, the People's Court sentenced approximately 7,000 people to death.
Jesus Christ.
Maniacal in his tone and harsh in his judgments, Freisler oversaw two historical cases. The members of the...
wasn't Hitler supposedly uncomfortable when in a room with Himmler? It wouldn't be surprised. Himmler was a well-known batshit crazy occultist, the type of guy that even made Hitler look crazy. When you remember all of the insane Aryan beliefs, the occult beliefs about the Holy Grail and the Atlanteans and all that shit, most of that was Himmler, okay? Hitler was a psychopath, but he also wasn't into occult shit the way that Himmler was.
White Rose and the conspirators of the July 20th, 1944 assassination plot against Hitler. At the University of Munich, members of the White Rose resistance produced 6 leaflets against the Third Reich. Hans and Sophie Scholl, along with their colleague Christoph Probst and their mentor Kurt Huber, were deeply committed to the high ideals of the White Rose movement. Condemned as conspirators against the government, they were sentenced to death for treason during wartime.
Große Firma! Na, die gehört aber zur schwarzen Fraktion. Ja, das sieht man Ihnen an. Das ist klar, das kann ja nicht anders sein. Ist ja ulkig. Wie wichtig wohl das Amt des Zivilanwalts da gewesen sein muss, das Sie gehabt haben, dass Sie nicht mal Anwalt, nicht mal Soldat geworden sind mit dem Alter. Und dann von da sind Sie dienstverpflichtet worden. Spricht ja auch für Ihre Haltung.
Wow, that sounds so similar to MAGA fucking rats. They're like, well, why don't you join the army? Why don't you join the military, you fucking pussy?
Feines Früchtchen. Ja, feines Früchtchen. Die haben gewartet, bis man die Dienstverpflichteten. Und zwar, wo sind sie hingegangen?
That's so, oh my god, that's so, I'm so used to that.
Outside Stalingrad, the icy winter becomes a fiery hell.
Stories about the atrocities committed by the Nazis began to leak out of Europe, primarily in 1942 and 1943. We actually have documentation from the British in particular, in which British officials are already talking about death camps.
So this is another thing. Don't let anybody fool you into saying like, oh my God, we didn't know. No, America, the Western world, America, the UK, France, we knew about the death camps from their inception. Our political leaders were aware of it, but they didn't want the American public, or at least in America, they didn't want the American public to get too riled up about it, right? So they suppressed it. They were skeptical of it. They didn't believe that this shit was happening. And then when American GIs, nearly 6 years later, finally liberated some of these camps, and we saw the emaciated survivors of the Holocaust walking out, then it was irrefutable. We could no longer deny it. But at that point, it was too fucking late.
Places where Jews in particular were being murdered by the hundreds of thousands by poison gas. You can find references to this in government documents from the British already in late 1942, early 1943. So there was a level of awareness already of the scale and the immensity of the crimes being perpetrated. Of course, in 1943 then, Battle of Stalingrad, early 43, Battle of Stalingrad is one of the major turning points. It really looks from this point forward, after the defeat of the Sixth Army, that Nazi Germany's days were numbered.
This was Kyle and Kessel with a vengeance. But the Nazis were getting Kesseled instead of the Russians. And on February the 2nd, 1943, after 162 days of the heaviest fighting in the history of warfare, the last shot was fired.
The Soviets fucking starved the Germans out. The Germans rushed into Stalingrad with no fucking plan. By the time the 6th Army was inside, the Soviets decided to just encircle the city itself and to do an old-fashioned medieval siege where they would literally just blockade the entire city and let the remaining Germans inside of it starve to death. So the first thing that happened was the Germans ran out of ammo. And when they ran out of ammo, they started using their rifles to build fires because there's wood. Once they ran out of ammo, they started to run out of food. They ran out of gas. Once they ran out of gas, they ran out of food. Once they ran out of food, they started eating the horses. Once they ran out of horses, the German soldiers in the 6th Army stuck in Stalingrad resorted to cannibalism. They began eating the corpses of their fallen comrades. Only after they resorted to cannibalism did they finally accept that defeat was inevitable. And I believe it was something like 600,000 German soldiers surrendered to the Soviets. Every single one of those soldiers perished in a fucking gulag. None of them went back home to Germany. Every single one of them suffered, which is good. That's a good thing. You want that to happen to fascists. But yeah, hopefully we can repeat that part of history.
Stalingrad. In the shattered streets, the blasted ruins, the ghastly evidence of their ordeal, the defenders of the city greet the rescuing army of the dawn. Stalingrad is free. The Nazis had capitulated.
General Eisenhower...
Never forget, there's a reason why the Germans, when they realized all was lost as the Soviets moved in from the east and the Americans bombed in from the west, there's a reason why the Germans sprinted to the Americans with their hands up. Because if they were taken prisoner by the Americans, they'd go to jail. If they were taken prisoner by the Soviets, there were things that would be done to them that I cannot say. I think you're picking up what I'm putting down. Things that don't involve consent. And also, that is quite literally part of the reason why Hitler offed himself, is because the Soviets, as they were riding around Berlin, were blasting on speakers that if they found Hitler, they would desecrate him. You understand? They would... Are you picking up what I'm putting down? They were playing on loudspeakers. When we find you, we're going in. We're going in. It's part of the reason why he ordered his body to be burnt to a crisp, because he didn't want the Russians to parade his body around. Peace out, Keith.
That the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe. For this victory, we join in offering our thanks to the Providence which has guided and sustained us through the dark days of adversity.
You see the Allies now beginning to think in terms of what they're going to do with the major war criminals, as they were called. These were the leadership, leading figures of the Nazi government, Hitler, Goering, Goebbels, and so forth. How are they going to be treated? Churchill and his legal counselor, Lord John Simon, were of the view that the major war criminals were essentially...
We're watching this video about how it took Hitler 53 days to dismantle constitutional law within Germany, and it's incredibly reminiscent of how the Fuhrer, Elon Musk, and his beta gimp, Donald Trump, are dismantling democracy.
Outlaws
it's incredibly
who did not have to be given their day in court, but could in fact be taken, arrested, identified, of course, and then executed without the benefit of a trial.
These generals, 24 of them, who had covered themselves with such glory and such medals on the fields of Poland and Norway and France, they now had only their past glory to comfort.
Very clearly, the Soviets did not have in mind a trial or a proceeding along the lines of an Anglo-American litigated proceeding. They had in mind instead a show trial, not unlike the Stalinist show trials of the 1930s, in which Stalin was able to identify his alleged enemies, charge them with various imaginary crimes, and secure their conviction and then have them executed in the 1930s. This is the proceeding which they they wanted to impose upon the major war criminals. The Soviet foreign minister, Molotov, had already talked with the Allies on behalf of the Soviet government and tried to persuade them that the best way to deal with the major war criminals was by means of a special international tribunal. Stimson was of the view that a special international tribunal could be used in which the major war criminals would be prosecuted, but they would enjoy the same kinds of due process rights which any American accused of an offense would enjoy. The right to hear the charges against them, the right to study the indictment, the right to...
I don't know what that is. It's a book. Documents the agreement between Nazi Germany and the Organization of German Zionists in 1933. Salvage German Jewish assets. Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of the Madagascar deal. Let me show you this. Don't forget that Hitler also proposed to send the Jews to Madagascar. Yeah, the Madagascar plan. Proposed to relocate the Jewish population of Europe to the island of Madagascar. So, like, just never forget that, like, when it comes to, like, people claiming that, like, Israel is the land of the Jews and ancestrally, they have... Brother, it didn't matter where they went. They just wanted their own fucking land. And they decided to take land that somebody else already lived on.
Counsel and the right to defend themselves in a fair proceeding.
Nuremberg remained a focal point for the National Socialist Party, hosting popular rallies and political congresses starting in 1927. It continued through the Nuremberg Laws of 1935, and again in November 1945, the focus was on Nuremberg, as the city became the seat of the International Military Tribunal to address war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The drums of doom begin to beat for 24 top Nazis as Nuremberg becomes the scene of the War Crimes Tribunal. Among the ruins of this former shrine of Nazism, an ordinary jail houses its former big shots. Each has a solitary cell and is forbidden to talk during exercise. Under indictment are Arthur Sykes Inquart, former Gauleiter of Holland. Julius Streicher, fanatical anti-Semite. Rudolf
Elon,
Hess, one-time
J.D.
adjutant of
Vance,
Hitler.
Pete
And
Hegseth.
Hermann Goering.
Just throw all those
Chief
fucking
U.S.
pieces of
prosecutor
shit
at
in a
Nuremberg,
cell.
Robert Jackson, stated in his diary that the court was charged with establishing a
Hey,
rule of
Luigi,
law in the
that's
place
gross.
where it had been said there would be no more law.
What is the advantage of conspiracy? It afforded the government, the Allied government, with the opportunity to charge the Nazis with a substantive offense as well as participation in a criminal organization, which meant that you did not necessarily have to show an individual criminal act committed by the defendant. What's interesting about conspiracy, again, is that it connects all of the individual charges against the Nazis.
What he's going to talk about is by charging these high-ranking Nazis with conspiracy, they didn't have to actually commit any crimes themselves. All they had to do was be aware that Hitler was attempting to commit heinous crimes. Hitler's plan was to exterminate all these people, and if you are aware of the plan and you participate in it, you are guilty by association. That's how they were able to try all of these people, regardless of the fact that some of them had never killed a person themselves, but they would still be responsible for the deaths of millions of people.
So in addition to charging with the Nazis with war crimes, or with crimes against peace or crimes against humanity, they are also charged with conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, conspiracy to commit crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit war crimes. So, yeah, conspiracy, again, this notion of a criminal organization, the criminal plan to conquer the world, that was the foundation that underlay the entire case, especially on the American side.
One after another, the prosecutors came forward to state the case against the criminals. The first to speak was Robert Jackson.
In the prisoner's dock sit 20 odd broken men, reproached by the humiliation of those they have led, almost as bitterly as by the desolation of those they have attacked. Their personal capacity for evil is forever past. It is hard now to perceive in these miserable men as captives the power by which, as Nazi leaders, they once dominated much of the world and terrified
This is what I do instead of
most
therapy.
We will show
Maybe grab
them
another
to be
cup of coffee.
living symbols of racial hatred, of terrorism and
You guys
violence,
stay here, keep watching.
and of the arrogance and cruelty of power.
The Allies really learned of Nazi war crimes when the Nazis embarked on aggressive war. The core theory of the Nuremberg prosecution is that the aggressive war itself was a crime. It's an overarching theory of criminality, and then within the war there are battlefield war crimes. But really, from the time Germany went on the march in 1939 into Poland, there was Allied thinking, particularly American and British thinking, that this was illegal, it violated treaties, it was criminal.
Raphael Lemkin provided Jackson with the foundation for this international law, establishing a paradigm for prosecution of war crimes. Based upon his research of the massacres of more than 1 million Armenians by the Ottoman Turks, Lemkin created the hybrid word genocide.
The very term genocide had only been coined a year before the Nuremberg trial started. It was coined in 1944 by Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish Jewish advisor to the U.S. War Department. That term genocide was already used as a descriptive term at Nuremberg, but it wasn't until the UN Convention of 1948 that genocide became recognized as its own independent crime in international law.
In an incremental way, expanding from Germany into the East and occupied nations, Nazi perpetration is a visible thing. What it adds up to, and that it's a planned extermination venture, is something that is, very barely understood, not just during the war years, but even as they're embarking on prosecution. They're really almost sort of discovering what we would call the Holocaust as they're prosecuting it, and getting evidence and realizing the enormity of what they're dealing with.
This would be a way of showing the superior political power, the superior moral power of a kind of a liberal democratic regime, right? So by not pursuing a purely political...
This is where I think humanity went down the wrong path. This is where I believe humanity went down the wrong path. When we decided to give these men a fair trial and to try them and to only execute 10 of them, and to kind of let the world know that you can just be thrown in a prison cell for something like this. This is when the idea of neoliberalism kind of took over the planet. These men, the high-ranking Nazis who, were responsible for the Holocaust, they should have been executed. En masse, publicly. The planet should have realized that the only justifiable, the only fair reaction to something like this would be execution. And instead, we let the world know that, no, if you're successful, you can get away with this type of shit.
strategy with respect to the Nazis, but by giving them a fair trial, it was a way of saying, we're going to give you the chance you never gave your enemies, and it's going to show that we're stronger and that this is a better path for the future. So it was kind of, there was a moral argument for it, but there was also a very profound kind of political argument that this would be a more effective tool for preserving the peace going forward.
It wasn't a more effective
the Allies
tool. It did not
chose to take
preserve
the moral
the peace.
high ground by providing fair trials.
When they go low, we
22
go high.
high-ranking-
No, when they go low, you go fucking lower.
Nazi leaders were put on trial for crimes against humanity and crimes against the peace. The historic Nuremberg courtroom 600 is still used for trials today.
The Nazis committed astonishing crimes that we're all very familiar with. Nuremberg was not in the first order a Holocaust trial. It really was, as I mentioned, it was a trial about the launching of aggressive war. But nonetheless, if you look back at Nuremberg, the prosecutors did a pretty impressive and a pretty responsible job of bringing the crimes that the Nazis had committed against the European Jews to the courtroom.
The extensive trials concerning Nazi criminality have continued into the 21st century, with attempts to balance both justice and mercy.
You know, some people will be like, look at him, he's just a nice old man. Like, how could you throw this man in prison?
The most famous of these are the so-called successor trials,
up. That's a Nazi.
Also held in Nuremberg before an American military tribunal. These prosecuted functional elites from throughout Nazi society. So there was a trial for doctors, there were a trial for judges, there was a trial of the high command of the army, right? So a series of kind of trials of different elements of the Nazi elite. But there were also Allied military trials, Soviet, British, French, and American, of war criminals lower ranking, right? So the Americans held a trial at the Dachau concentration camp, or a series of trials at the Dachau concentration camp in which hundreds of Nazis were prosecuted. The British had their own trial program, as did the French. The Russians prosecuted about 30,000 Germans for war crimes. Now, these were Russian trials. How fair they were, you know, is anybody's guess.
But
given
the Russians tried 30,000, and we tried how many?
Trials, Soviet, British, French, and American, of war criminals lower ranking, right? So the Americans held a trial at the Dachau concentration camp, or a series of trials at the Dachau concentration camp in which hundreds of Nazis were prosecuted.
Hundreds. We charged hundreds.
The British had their own trial program, as did the French. The Russians prosecuted about 30,000.
30,000 from the Russians. You want to know why? It's because the fucking Russians know how to do business.
Germans for war crimes. Now, these were Russian trials. How fair they were, you know, is anybody's guess. But given the level of Nazi criminality, I always say it's a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel. Even the Russians managed to find a lot of guilty people in that context.
As the Cold War broke out in the wake of an apocalyptic conflict, history had to be rewritten, reframing the Nuremberg trials within the context of victor's justice. Nuremberg still stands as a memorial to international justice, a reminder of the devastating consequences caused by unlawful manipulation of constitutional law for political and racial purposes. The criminal leaders of the Third Reich forced humanity to pay a heavy price.
Crazy. All right, guys. I'm out of here. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, donate $7,000 to the channel. Scary past, scary present, scary future. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.